Recording in progress.
Hi, this is Jennifer Walker presenting for ALTC 803, Module 3, Intersections on the Foundations of Rights. So my presentation is about dress codes, acceptable attire, and freedom of speech. There are lots of questions that I think about in relation to this topic, both specific and broad. So, background. The landmark case of Tinker versus Des Moines from 1969 set the precedent for the future disputes about rules regarding freedom of speech in schools, especially pertaining to dress. So, this established that dress could be deemed inappropriate by school officials only under a few certain specific conditions. So, the dress or whatever the student is wearing, if it's inappropriate, it disrupts or endangers the other students, and it may advocate the use of illegal drugs. So here is what the two boys were wearing, and this was an expression of their disdain for the Vietnam War. So they ruled that it was okay for the students to wear this because there was no intent to harm any other students. It wasn't disruptive and it wasn't condoning any sort of illegal drugs. So here are some shirts that we could perhaps see nowadays as a correlation that are expressing specifically political opinions. And we can talk about later whether some of these are appropriate or not. And we will talk about the laws and rulings that have happened. So, from the top here, this is some sort of drug narcotics. I'm not even sure what this shirt is. Here is a pro-abortion shirt, and right below it is a anti-abortion shirt. Over here is what's supposed to be a pro-gun shirt, but it has a joke inherent in it about over here. Here's the equality shirt, and over here is a, what would you call this? This is the shirt that would go against this. So here are hourly political shirts that you might see. So I was really thinking about something. My question has to do with something that I see in our schools, which we do have a lot of political shirts and things like this. We haven't had anything like that for good reason, and we'll talk about that later. So here are some of the kind of questionable, and I'll go around and talk about these. So, first one I want to call your attention to is the top right, which is a brand that I had seen a lot, some kids wearing, and I didn't really know what it was. But a student mentioned this to me once, that this had to do with pot. So I looked it up and it is it's a brand of cannabis. And so there's that. Um, Other shirts that seem to have kind of some blurred lines are, if there's shirts where there's a clear pot leaf. There was one of those back on this page with this. So these are really where these kind of blur together. Over here on the left, I wanted to show some shirts that um, kind of have some artwork that could be considered drug or not, or sort of ambivalent to not be either. Um, and then over down here are a popular show that I've seen a lot of students wearing, and um, the one I will call your attention to is this one here, and I have seen a couple of these where The characters look like they are definitely on some sort of drugs. So, here's the central questions that I want to ask in relation to these types of sort of blurred situations. So, when should teachers and administrators take action, and when should they allow students their freedom of expression? Essentially, when should they tell them that they can't wear something, and when should they allow them to wear it? Also, a question that I think of a lot with this is, especially with the political t-shirts and things, is do teachers and students have different rules and expectations placed on them about freedom of speech? And if so, is this okay? So if specifically if students if teachers are not allowed to express political opinions, but students are, and where's the line drawn with that? And the last question I think about is, I think the most important one, which is what actual specific issues surface, or I'm really just going to talk about what issues might surface due to this blurring of lines of what can be worn, and what can and should teachers do, especially within their classrooms, to help students approach these issues, when if they're seeing a lot of these shirts and things, and maybe they're even wearing things that look kind of similar but have different content, but similar colors or whatever. So, when I imagine what potential issues, especially problematic ones, because obviously this doesn't even matter unless there's problems. So, um, would be first of all, students might be engaging teachers and administrators in questions of moral right and wrong relating to these currently controversial political topics. So, they might ask some questions about equal rights and the equality flag. They might ask them about their views about gun rights. They might ask them about what they think about legalization of cannabis and even other drugs and things. So yeah, that kind of brings up a subtopic that I talked about, but I think I'm not going to zone in about. But it does kind of put teachers on the spot, where they might either have to profess their own political view, or they might refuse to profess, say, I'm not going to say, or they might just lie about it, just in an effort to kind of protect a self preservation effort. And I'll talk about my opinion on that later as well. Another issue that could come up is that students could be more easily influenced to try drugs if they see these images of drugs being just right out in front of them at their school, and the teachers don't or administrators don't do anything about it. So if there is a gradual increase in a student culture that's surrounded by drug use and experimentation. Lastly, one of the potential issues that could come up is just would be the radicalization of student beliefs, and these could range from political beliefs, to gang related more, in response to threats from basically an increase in students thinking of in group and out group patterns. So if they're made more aware of a certain political group, and if people start wearing different political, I mean, you have to use your own imagination here with this if you want to actually see the potential danger. Um, yeah. So here's the example that has come into the courts is in from 2020, when these Wisconsin students were wearing these shirts, which are political messages, but also were particularly uh, problematic in the school setting. So in this case, which went on for about 2 years, called New Jersey versus Sonnabend, the district's court found that the school administrators were entitled to consider the impact the students who regarded the impact on students. So they regarded these images as a frightening reminder of the possibility of school violence and the potential intent by the students donning the shirts to provoke or intimidate by displaying these images. Seeing how they word this. So we can think about intention with every single one of these t-shirts and even this bag. So um, if you're a student and you're aware of what this is, you can think of what message these might send you. So ultimately, when I go back to look at these, I'm just thinking a lot about how what we wear is an expression of our identity, and we do need to consider whether certain things are problematic or not. So, oops, that's kind of in trying to zone in on an actual answer to my question about what to do about um, these things that students are wearing and carrying. So, first of all, this lesson that we see with the gun t-shirts just tells us how much culture and dress cannot ever be separated. So, as shown by the most recent case involving students attempting to wear t shirts with images of firearms, the threshold of acceptable dress is sometimes a fine line dependent on the prevailing current cultural and political climates within the school and the city. So, due to the unique status of the gun debate in relation to schools, the general cultural climate has determined that shirts with images of certain types of firearms are exceptionally frightening when seen within the school environment, which has seen an increase in gun violence in schools in recent years. So, this leaves the current acceptance or denial of cannabis or other drug related attire and bags. And I include in this the representations of psychedelic artwork depicting various types of mushrooms, still up for individual interpretation depending on what problems actually surface within each school. So, if these images begin to correlate directly with an increase in drug related problems, then a similar assumption of an intent to harm could be deemed, or even an attempt to intimidate, I suppose, as it's worded, could be deemed. And so the attire could thus be restricted. A similar outlook could be adopted in relation to political attire, wherein restrictions may be enacted if extreme or violent conditions between political gangs of students become a problematic norm. And the expression of if a certain political identity also implies a possibility of harm to those who disagree with the political ideology. So we're kind of just talking about gangs that are um, highly politicized. So yeah, just imagining if things could go wrong. So conclusion about this is just that adults have a responsibility to continuously set and manage safe boundaries for kids. So that means that we can imagine what these things might happen, or could what we can imagine what these things could escalate to, and we can imagine a solution, and our job is to continuously respond to what's happening and just be observant. So first of all, noticing what they're wearing. So teens especially are testing boundaries, and they're evaluating trends all on their own. So it's especially important for this age group to gain independence of judgment and perception. So we need to let them do this on their own. Um, Teachers must accept their responsibility in helping students manage the tough questions, and they must prioritize being emotionally mature when discussing polarized or controversial topics. They should also let students lead the conversation. And these are just guidelines that I think of in response to my own learning and my own um, teaching so far. I don't really have specific evidence at this time for these theories. Teachers should not impose their political beliefs on students. They are encouraged to maintain a professional neutrality by right of their own privacy. By this, teachers can model to students how to engage in conversations about political topics without outright committing to any one political belief. This models objectivity. Teachers and administrators should strive to let adolescents drive themselves as much as possible. What I mean about we don't have to set up to outlaw these clothing and things unless it's a clear issue. Um, so we should have boundaries set in place and action plans set for if issues pop up. Um, so here's the closing. So in thinking about this show, Rick and Morty, they Rick and Morty go on a lot of adventures together, and they explore a lot of different worlds and dimensions. And but Rick is really very he has planned ahead pretty much for any possible scenario. So they're always just narrowly escaping, and it's a thrilling show. And just that's what an adult, that's a teacher needs to be to a student, that we need to be ready to respond, but we also need to let the students try things out on their own and learn things for themselves. So here are the references. Good luck in all your teaching, and thank you for listening.